What is up, NFL fans? Welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach KT Smith as we dissect what happened in Week 4 of NFL action. Coach, how's it going?
Going great, Jeff. We're a quarter of the way done the NFL season, basically,
Uh,
right now. Isn't that shocking?
it is shocking. It is absolutely shocking, and it's also shocking that it's now October. I mean, where did
Yeah,
September
yeah,
go? Like it's
yeah.
one of those situations where, I mean, my kids have been talking about Halloween forever, but still, next thing you know, we're going to be talking about Christmas and the holidays. So let's dive headfirst into this. In case it's your first time listening to the podcast, we do 5 topics and then a player profile at the end. Let's start off. As I mentioned, September's over. We're at the quarter pole position of the NFL season. Who, in your opinion, is the best team in the league right now? Coach, I'll let you go first.
Um, well, I mean, I've thought about this now for a little bit, and it's tempting to say the Vikings because their start has been amazing. They undoubtedly had the best first 4 games of the year. They have some very, very quality wins. Uh, but I'm still withholding a little bit of judgment on them until we see Sam Darnold do it for a bit longer. Let's see if the NFL now with 4 games of tape on Sam Darnold begins to figure out like what he's doing and how to defend it. And I'm tempted to say the Chiefs because I feel like they're the Chiefs, right? And they're undefeated and they're the defending Super Bowl champs. But if I'm going to base my answer off the last 2 weeks, and you're not going to like what I'm going to say, Jeff. But
Okay.
honestly, when I look at the league right now, I think the scariest team is the Baltimore Ravens, just because of what they can do on offense, man.
Yeah.
What they've done the last 2 weeks to Dallas and Buffalo, 2 good football teams on the offensive side of the ball, for me, makes them the scariest team because when you can control the clock and time of possession with the run game, and they're always sound and solid on defense, but what they can do on offense can take the life out of a lot of teams. Now, granted, they've been a really good regular season team over the last several years and not been able to get it done in the postseason. And this is probably a very different conversation 2 months from now. But I feel like they, after a slow start, have turned the corner and the last 2 weeks have shown me that I think they're the scariest team.
Okay. And that's fair. And it's totally fair because I watched a good bit of that Sunday night game. And I mean, whether it was the 80-plus yard touchdown run on the first play from scrimmage from Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson looked accurate. He looked like he was just, I mean, outside of a fumble, he pretty much played a spot on game. I'm going to go with Kansas City because they're the champs and they beat the Ravens in week 1. And people might want to poo-poo how they've won. And I don't want to discredit the Vikings and what they've done because they've beaten some good teams as well. But man, the Chiefs are that team. And we talked about this all last season on our first year with the NFL Whip Round. It's like they just won't die. Like it's like that zombie movie. We're getting into October and the Halloween season. So you talk about the Michael Myers of the NFL are the Chiefs. Like they just won't go away. Like, damn it, just die already. And they just don't. I'm going to say the Chiefs. I agree with you, though. There are some teams that are not undefeated that are looking really, really dangerous. And, I'll ask you about this team because this team had a really high hopes heading into this. And by the way, we're recording this before Monday Night Football. So Seattle's 3-0 at the time of this being recorded. We don't know if they're going to win or not. What's your take on the Texans? They're 3-1. The way that they're doing it is odd. They've won some close games. Everyone wanted to, just crown CJ Stroud as the next guy in the AFC. What's your take on them after 4 games?
Yeah, I think the Texans are a team that are a victim of the hype a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, remember 2 years ago they went 3-14, and then last year they obviously surprised a lot of people. Stroud was great, D'Amico Ryans was great, Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, was great. But this league, man, it is the coaching is so good, and your opponents are so good at finding ways to neutralize the things that you do well. And then you got to figure out a way to either recreate them or smoke and mirror them or whatever it might be, man. The talent disparity between teams in this league is very minimal. And so much of it falls on coaching. And so I think that defenses are kind of figuring out a little bit of what the Texans did well last year and finding ways to make life more difficult. And now it falls on Ryan and Slowick and that coaching staff to make their counter move. And we just haven't really seen it yet. You can't be disappointed with 3-1, but it certainly hasn't looked like the Texans from last year.
And I'll ask you one more, and I'm sticking with the AFC right now, and let's say what you want. But the team that lost to the Ravens on Sunday Night Football, the Buffalo Bills, they're 3-1. And a lot of people will say, wow, they've scored 122 points. That's a great season so far. But a lot of people are pointing to who they've beaten, and it hasn't been a murderer's row. What's your take on Buffalo after 4 games as well?
Hard to get a feel for them. You and I talked about this in the preseason. It just Buffalo lost a lot of talent, and it felt like maybe this was a little bit of a step back year for them. Then they got out of the gate fast, but they just got waxed by the Ravens on Sunday night. And it's just the way Baltimore did it by just being so much more physical and leaving that Buffalo defense just completely confused about what they wanted to try to defend, et cetera. I think this will be a team where we're going to have a much better feel for them maybe 3-4 games down the road. So I'm just kind of withholding judgment on the Bills right now.
All right. And there's a lot of teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would fall into that holding judgment, I would imagine as well. Depending on the outcome of Monday Night Football, the Lions are supposed to be a cream of the crop in the NFC. The 49ers win finally. They beat New England. What are they? We'll talk about some of those as we go, but there's a lot of those those teams that are in the we'll see how it pans out. But let's go to the other side. Our next topic, let's examine the teams that maybe are not the worst in the league, but maybe the most disappointing. So, Coach, when you look at the NFL in its entirety, which team so far after 4 games has been the most disappointing to you?
Well, I think Jacksonville being 0-4 is shocking. That's a talented roster, and they brought in some talent in the offseason. And while Trevor Lawrence isn't playing terribly, it kind of feels like he's plateaued as a quarterback. I mean, he had a good start to his career, led Jacksonville on that exciting comeback playoff win a couple years ago against the Chargers, and the hype machine kicked in. And last year, Jacksonville was supposed to be the cream of the crop in that division. And then it turned out to be Houston, and the Jaguars struggled. And to have them at 0-4 right now, that just feels like they're really missing the mark. And I'm not sure. I haven't followed Jacksonville closely enough to know exactly the reasons for their poor start. But they feel like a team that if they don't get it together soon, there's going to be some guys that are going to be put on notice down there.
Okay, there's a couple teams I'm going to have here, but the first one is the New York Jets. The New York Jets, I feel, are an unbelievably disappointing team and a disappointing story, and I'll tell you why. Let's go back over their schedule, because remember the narratives after last season. Aaron Rodgers' last 3 plays before rupturing his Achilles tendon, and he's done for the year. And everyone said next year, with him and that offense and that defense especially, they're going to be just fine. Everything, it's going to fix all their woes. So they lose 32-19 in week 1 against the 49ers. They beat up on a bad Titans team 24-17. They beat the Patriots 24-3 on Thursday Night Football. And then what do they do to follow that up? In week 4, they lose 10-9 against the Denver Broncos in maybe one of the ugliest games of the year. Not only that, you have these weird instances with Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh where whether it's sideline interactions, what Aaron Rodgers is saying in the post-game press conference. They play the Vikings next week, and then they play the Bills, and then they play the Steelers. The Jets season right now, to me, is hinging on collapse. I don't know. What do you think about the New York Jets?
Oh, I agree 100%, man. I think the dysfunction between the quarterback and the head coach right now is a huge problem, especially for the head coach, because if management's going to side with one of those two, if that thing goes bad and management's going to side with one of those two, we all know who they're siding with. Yeah. And it ain't the head coach, because they've invested a lot in Aaron Rodgers. I mean, they had a really to me, this is really telling. Robert Saleh in his post-game press conference on Sunday said he thought Aaron Rodgers was doing too much at the line of scrimmage in terms of audibles, cadence, checks like that, and that it was leading to a lot of mistakes and miscommunications, and that maybe he needed to dial it back. And Aaron Rodgers responded by saying, well, that's one way to do it, or you could hold the players more accountable. And that is a direct shot at the head
Yes.
coach, which is basically saying, don't ask me to dumb it down because you can't get everybody else up to speed. And that isn't it. And we know how Aaron Rodgers can be with those kind of passive aggressive or aggressive comments. And it is a public comment directly at the head coach. And people take notice of that. And so this thing, man, if it doesn't turn around, is headed for a car crash.
Absolutely. Do you have any other disappointing teams? Do you want me to say my other one?
Oh, I think I know who you're going to say, but go say it because I'm going to chime in.
Shout out to Kurt Russell in the 1980s, like Big Trouble in Little China. It's Philadelphia, the Eagles,
that's
man.
What I thought you were gonna say.
The Eagles. I'm sorry. I've said this all going back to the way they finished last season, and you can go back and check the tape. We've talked about this. We never stopped the NFL whip around. We did it all summer, all throughout the offseason. I said, I am not buying the Eagles because of the way they finished last season. It wasn't because of injury. There's in-house issues. So they beat the Packers in week 1. They lose to the Falcons on Monday night in week 2. Week 3, they barely squeak out a win against the Saints, and they get their doors blown off in week 4 by the Buccaneers. And you've already said that, you're in Philly territory in terms of where you live in New Jersey. You've already said that people were calling for Sirianni's head prior to this loss. I can only imagine how that is magnified after that last game. I think they have some serious issues in Philadelphia. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's a head coach problem. I don't think if they make a change, it's all going to be fine and everything's going to be honky-dory now. I don't agree with that. This team has been a huge disappointment, but I can't say enough about how I called it.
No, you've been spot on as far as that goes. I mean, if you have like Sirius satellite radio, do yourself a favor and tune into some Philly talk news or sports talk radio, man. Because Joe from Fishtown is pissed off today, man, and he's going to let the airwaves hear about it. But you're right. It goes beyond coaching. Jalen Hurts is not the quarterback that he was a couple years ago. I'm not 100% sure why that is. Obviously, some injuries have hamstrung the offense as well. The line, losing Jason Kelce has been, they're not as effective as they were a few years ago. It feels like the league is caught up to their style of play. Like we were just talking about, you get good at a thing, your opponents will figure out how to neutralize or take that thing away. And then you've got to reinvent it or get good at something else. And the Eagles haven't found that counter move yet. And again, they're another team, I think, where you got to turn it around pretty fast in Philly. Jeffrey Lurie's a fairly patient owner, but this isn't like the Steelers where they're going to, let you play through it.
I don't know. I mean, they have the Browns next week. So you would think that, okay, that's a favorable matchup. They've dropped games like this already this season. I don't think any Philly fan can be confident about their team in any game. We'll see how this goes, but I could see this thing absolutely imploding. And to be honest with you, Philly fans, I'm here for it. They're obnoxious. So just leave it at that. Let's go on the other side of the docket. On a scale from 1 to 10, where are you on the Jaden Daniels hype train? 1 being that this is all way too soon. People should slow down on the kid. 10 being Daniels is the next dominant quarterback in the league. Where do you fall on that scale, Coach?
Well, I think the national media is on the 10 side, man. I mean, the hype for Daniels right now is incredible and deservedly, man. He over the last couple of weeks, he's completed like 80% of his passes and is putting up incredibly prolific numbers. And it's not just the numbers, it's the way he's doing it because he's got such poise. He looks like a guy who's been in the league for a long time already. I mean, it's little things. Like you see him doing things like flipping guys, in the formation because they're lined up wrong, which shows his awareness of the broader scheme. You see him changing protections. You see him just very, very calmly and casually, like stepping up through a cluttered pocket to find open space and move into that area and extend a play. Or, when he takes off out of the pocket, keeping his eyes down the field and not just looking to run the ball, but looking to make the chunk play first. I mean, he's doing like the things that veteran quarterbacks are really good at doing. Now, all that said, I kind of put my number, so to speak, at maybe a 7 or so, because it is a small sample size. We did see this last year with CJ Stroud, and I'm not saying CJ Stroud isn't an elite quarterback, but that the league is he is the league's caught up to him a little bit this year.
Yeah.
At what point will the league catch up to Washington? I'm not sure of that answer. Awesome start for the kid, but I'm not ready to crown him just yet.
Yeah, and Cliff Kingsbury's doing a good job as the OC. They're setting him up for success. He's just following those orders and he's executing. I mean, so far in 4 games, he's thrown for 897 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 1 interception for an average rating of 107.4. His lowest quarterback rating was in week 1 at Tampa Bay, where he had 93.1 rating. The guy is playing really good football. I don't think anyone saw that coming. But I think, too, when you look at the Washington Commanders, they're surprising a lot of people as well. I don't think anyone saw them hanging up 42 against the Cardinals, even though the Cardinals, we never had super high hopes for them. But it's going to be interesting to see how he plays down the stretch. Let's go over some of the games he has coming up. They have the Browns. I'm sorry, the Browns next week. The Commanders and Ravens will square off on the 13th of October. But then the Panthers, Bears, and Giants before facing the Steelers coming off their bye week. It's going to be interesting. I would say that if I'm giving that scale on a scale from 1 to 10, I'm going to give it a 6.5. I'm going to give it a 6.5 because I think he's well on his way. And last year, I wouldn't say that the league ever caught up with CJ Stroud. Maybe it is this year, but in his rookie season, I really can't say that they did catch up with him. Would you?
No, you're right. I mean, it has been more of a this year thing with Houston. You look at what Washington's doing. They're doing some similar things to what the Texans did with Stroud last year. They move the pocket, which is great because you don't let defenses get a bead for where he's going to be and just tee off on him. You use max protection at times so that he knows, hey, I got 7 guys in pass protection right now. I can feel comfortable in the pocket. The play action game, the read option game. These modern tools that offensive coordinators have for dual threat quarterbacks like Stroud and like Daniels, but at the same time, they're also building in older school principles like the max protections so that they don't have to feel like, the rush is coming right now and the ball's got to be out of their hand. I mean, this is what ruined Justin Fields in Chicago, that the Bears put him in all these spread sets with 5-man protections, and defenses just blitzed the daylights out of them and basically said, we're going to dare you to get the ball out right now. And you see the teams that are having more success with their young quarterbacks taking a better approach, especially from a protection standpoint. When I had the pleasure to work last year with Paul Gunther, when he was working with our coaching staff at Ocean City, he was, Paul was a defensive coordinator in the league for 16 years. He's coaching with the Cowboys right now. The number one thing he was emphasizing was protect the quarterback. Whatever we're doing in our passing scheme, make sure that we can protect it so that the quarterback feels confident, because the worst thing that you could possibly have is a quarterback who gets skittish because he feels like the rush is closing in on him and he's got to get the ball out immediately. And I think that the Commanders are doing a great job of that with Daniels.
Yeah, we'll see how he plays out the rest of the string, and it's so far so good. I mean, the Commanders have to be ecstatic with what they have and what they've seen, and they've surrounded him with a lot of veterans. Whether you're talking about Austin Eckler, whether you're talking about Zach Ertz is there on the roster now, I believe. They've done a good job, and that's weird to say that about the Washington organization, but so far so good for Washington as they start out 3-1. Let's go to our next topic. Name one player or coach whose seat is warming up and who really needs to turn things around to save their job. We might have alluded to some of these already, but Coach, who you got?
Yeah, we definitely have. I mean, for me, I think Robert Saleh is the guy who given the nature of coaching in New York City and how high profile that is, and then of course pairing him up now with one of the most high profile athletes in the league in Aaron Rodgers, the spotlight on that team is just going to get brighter and more intense if they continue to struggle. And I don't know if he's built himself a resume that's earned him the benefit of the doubt. If this was a guy like Doug Peterson down in Jacksonville is another candidate for this, but Doug Peterson's won a Super Bowl, and that might get him a longer leash. And Jacksonville's certainly not the high profile job that you have up in New York. And I just don't know. I don't know if it continues to deteriorate with Rodgers, if the ownership group there will be patient.
So, yeah, this is really interesting because I was going to say Doug Peterson when I looked at the AFC, because this is a team that honestly, they had that one playoff run where they beat the Chargers and then they took the Chiefs to the wire and lost. And since then, it's been predominantly disappointing. And an 0-4 start is awful. In terms of coaches, because I'll go to the NFC in a second. In terms of coaches, how do you view organizations with new coaches? So I'm looking at the Titans. The Tennessee Titans are 0-3. Will Levis has been relatively disappointing, and they have a first-year coach down there. Do you think that he gets a longer leash because he's a first-year coach?
Yes. Yeah. And I think also because not just, Brian Callahan's a first year coach, but Bill Callahan, his father, is one of the most respected offensive line coaches in the NFL. And I think that he brings with him a system that may take a little bit of time to implement. I think if you hire Brian Callahan and you bring in his father with him, that you're making an investment. That's not Cliff Kingsbury to me is a little more of a splash move. And I know he's not a head coach, he's a coordinator, but I think you expect with Kingsbury things to click a little bit faster because it's a more up-tempo, high profile type of offense. Whereas what you're doing with the Titans down there is kind of like a slow build, man. It's a build from the inside out mentality. Tennessee doesn't have the offensive line that they had back when Derrick Henry was in his prime there. And so they're going to have to get the right pieces in place to make that system work. And that says to me, patience.
So we talked about Sirianni in Philadelphia. I think his seat is definitely hot. What's your take on Brian Daboll in New York? Because they have attached themselves to Daniel Jones in not a great way. They're 1-3. What's your take on his seat?
Well, I think if the ownership group gave Daniel Jones that extension, then I think by association, they were kind of saying we're with Brian Daboll. Because if you hitch Brian Daboll to Daniel Jones, then you're essentially saying like we've made the choice of who your quarterback's going to be, and knowing, of course, Daniel Jones hasn't exactly lit it up. So I think that they feel like Brian Daboll can develop him. I mean, Brian Daboll was the coach of the year in the NFL 2 years ago. I think that the Giants feel like they've got the right guy. I will say this. I'm not around the Giants, obviously, so I don't know exactly how it goes down. But they do say that Brian Daboll does rub some people the wrong way with the way that he treats them, talks to them, that he's an abrasive personality. And I don't know if that matters to the ownership group or not, but if it does and they continue to struggle, then maybe their thinking changes on him.
I would say staying in the NFC East, the only other name I'd come up with is Mike McCarthy down in Dallas. They're 2-2, but if things go south, I could see him being the first coach fired. Do you agree or disagree?
It's funny, man. Jerry Jones feels like he's been really supportive of Mike McCarthy, and maybe he thinks he's got the right guy. We've talked about this before. I think we both feel like this is a year where that whole coaching staff down there, they've got to produce this year. This is the year. You got all your guys back and re-signed, and all the money's been spent, and now you got to do it. So whether it happens during the season or after the season, if it goes bad for the Cowboys, I think McCarthy's out.
All right.
Can I throw a player at you?
Go ahead. I didn't even think about players.
Yeah,
but
we were talking about so it's interesting, man. I mean, I'm not saying this guy's under any pressure because he's not. He's actually the opposite. He probably couldn't be more secure. But it's interesting how Brandon Ayuk, since holding out for all that time and then finally getting the big payday and really being a diva about all of it, playing that all those games on social media, him in a Steelers uniform, him, I'd love to play with Jaden Daniels in Washington, blah, blah, blah. And he gets the deal that he wanted. And for the season right now, Brandon Ayuk's got 13 catches for 167 yards and no touchdowns. He got into a kind of like an altercation with his head coach in practice the other day over his shorts, which made the rounds on Twitter. Kyle Shanahan asked him to put on, I guess, the team approved shorts, and he threw a little hissy fit about it. Brandon Ayuk is like demonstrating right now those diva tendencies that can be culture killers for teams. And San Francisco is built on a team-first culture. They've got the buy-in from all their stars. And it'll be very interesting to see how this goes with Ayuk and whether or not he can kind of change the perception about him right now.
You love wide receivers, so I'm not.
I do not. I do not.
I'm not shocked, but yeah, hey, I got to be honest. Our source from within the Steelers organization at the Steel Curtain Network, he said the Steelers did not like those type of things about Brandon Ayuk, and was one of the reasons why they were very gun shy to go over and be like above and beyond the asking price. They had their offer out there. They weren't budging. They didn't budge. He stayed. That was one of those reasons. So when I saw that, I'm like, Steelers might know what they're doing after all. All right, let's go to our final topic before we get to the player profile. Anthony Richardson. The Colts beat the Steelers 27-24, but it wasn't Anthony Richardson who did that. He only played a few plays on Sunday before exiting the game with another injury. This was a hip injury. So Richardson hurt his hip while being tackled on a designed run, left the game. Joe Flacco comes in for 2 plays. After that, Shane Steichen sends him back onto the field, Anthony Richardson, that is, and he gets hit again, and this time he leaves the game for good, and he was unable to return. What do you make of the situation, and is Steichen and the Colts mismanaging their potential franchise quarterback?
Yeah, man. That was mind-boggling, man. I mean, here's Anthony Richardson, who only played 4 games last year as a rookie because his season ended early with an injury after being exposed to lots of hits, particularly when, you know, they've got these designed runs for him. And I get it, man. I love to run the quarterback. Our quarterback is actually our leading rusher right now. And we're running for, you know, well over 200 yards a game. But it's high school, man. You know, he's you know, like, and I have 2 good quarterbacks, and I can use them both. It's a different animal. In the NFL, I get it. Anthony Richardson is 6'4", 245 pounds, and can move. He is a beast of a runner. But, you know, those dudes hit like Mack trucks. And once the quarterback is out of the pocket running the football, he doesn't get those protections that he gets while he's in the pocket. And they have exposed him to an absurd number of hits. And the fact that he hurts his hip on a design run, you can see that. You saw the replay, Jeff, right? You see he goes, like, while the play's still going, he's visibly wincing and grabbing at his hip. Something's wrong. He goes out for 2 plays. He comes back in still limping, and they call another design run. Mind-boggling, man. And then he gets hit again, and now he's done for the game. That is, to use a popular phrase, coaching malpractice. That is just a bad. You got Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, man. You know, the ball's on the 8-yard line. Run the horse. Make sure your future franchise quarterback is okay. If I was the owner, I would have been furious watching that unfold.
It almost felt like Shane Steichen thought to himself, they'll never think we're going to run him. So we're just going to run the quarterback. And I don't know if it was a down and distance, a defense the Steelers threw out there. And Richardson tried to slide, and Minkah Fitzpatrick makes contact with him. I'm not even going to say hits him, because he's literally trying to like keep him from touching the ground. Like that's where we are with the state of defense in the NFL. And people were all up in arms. Like, well, he slid late. Minkah didn't clobber him. He could have. And it's like, well, I just can't believe they ran it. I said this at the time when I was watching the game. Like, I cannot believe that their quarterback comes back in and they do a designed quarterback run. Just, yeah, it just makes you question things. And I didn't realize this until coming into the game with the Steelers, because obviously I'm looking at the upcoming opponent, how inexperienced he is going back to high school. The guy's only started like a dozen games since high school. And so he's a really inexperienced quarterback. Just strange how Steichen is handling that situation. But do you think he is a franchise quarterback?
He certainly shows flashes that would make you believe so. The opening play of the game, Richardson hits Michael Pittman for like a 32-yard gain on a ball that is lasered down the field into a tiny little window. It's good coverage, and he just zips it down. Like, you see throws like that, or everybody's seen the Twitter clip of him rolling to his left, or not even being able to set his feet, and then launching a ball 68 yards in the air for a touchdown in week 1 or week 2, whatever that was. So he does those things, and then, you know, he's got obviously the running ability, and so I get why you would invest in him and say, man, if we can get him to play the position from the pocket and master the nuances of being an NFL quarterback, that he's just going to be special. But they got to be. Here's another reason they got to be careful, Jeff. Remember how it felt like the officials called the game differently for Ben Roethlisberger because he was so big and strong, and he could shrug off defenders.
Right.
And the same thing was true of Cam Newton. It just felt like they let defenders have a longer leash in terms of hitting those big, strong quarterbacks like Roethlisberger and Newton than they would a Patrick Mahomes, a Drew Brees, a smaller guy who's less mobile. Well, Richardson falls into that Newton Roethlisberger category, and it feels like the refs are going to let the defenders hit him more, which is just another reason why Steichen really needs to kind of tamp it down when it comes to exposing him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because this is that new style of quarterback. When you think about Jalen Hurts, you look at Justin Fields, you look at Anthony Richardson, super athletic. They can definitely move. They can definitely run. How the game is officiated is awful already, let alone you have these nuances of a quarterback that's also very mobile, large, and can take some of those hits. So we'll see how that goes. But let's finish this up with a player profile. You want to talk about Baker Mayfield? I don't know. Are you going to go into the Tom Brady comments here, or are you just going to talk about the win over the Eagles? Go ahead, Kedge.
I'll be honest. I'm unaware of the Tom Brady comments. So you can. I mean, I've heard that he made some, but I don't know what they are. So you can talk about that. I'm going to say this, man. When did Baker Mayfield become like a top 10 quarterback in the league? It feels like he's playing at that level. Last year, obviously, was a huge bounce back year for him. Led Tampa. They won the division, and they had that wild card win, and they almost upset Detroit in the divisional round. And here they are out of the gate again, 3-1, and playing good football. I think the big thing with Baker Mayfield, what has led to kind of the rejuvenation of his career, is they're minimizing the turnovers. That when he was in Cleveland earlier in his career, he had that gunslinger mentality. And people liked his moxie and all, but he was good for a soul-crushing interception just about every game. And they're minimizing that down in Tampa now. I mean, he only had 10 interceptions last year. He's only has 2 so far this year. So you're getting kind of the best of Baker Mayfield in terms of his enthusiasm, his energy, and you're minimizing the worst of him. So I don't love Baker Mayfield, his personality. I think he's the kind of guy, if he's like on your team, you love him. But if he's like on the other team, you're like, I can't stand this dude, But I like the reclamation story. I like the Geno Smith type stories. I love what's happening with Sam Darnold. It's nice to see guys who get written off be able to rebound and kind of rejuvenate their careers.
Well, Kevin O'Connell, I shared this video on social media on Twitter, and he was quoted by saying, and it was a video clip of him speaking, that the league has done a disservice to young players. That they're not allowing them to develop, and they're not putting them in the best cases to succeed. So you bring up Sam Darnold, you talk about Baker Mayfield, you talk about Geno Smith. I'll throw Justin Fields into the mix as well. All these players that once they found a situation that fits, you're seeing them excel. And so this is why everyone wants to tag these players as busts, but really, what situation are they going into? Baker Mayfield's situation in Cleveland was not good. It was not conducive to his success for whatever reason. Probably the fact that they have a rotating door at coach and the coaching staff in terms of it was just ongoing. But I think that when you look at Sam Darnold, who's been around the league a good bit in terms of how many teams he's played for, he has a good coach in Kevin O'Connell. You look at Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, like I mentioned, now it's still an unfinished story, but still the story we've seen so far is that he is capable of making plays that people in Chicago didn't think he was capable of. I think Baker Mayfield is a great example because people forget he went to Carolina, he went to the Rams, and then finally settles in Tampa Bay. And he's spoken about how going to those other locations after Cleveland actually helped him. It provided some perspective. He learned from a Sean McVay when he was in LA. He learned in all these different places. So it's interesting there. I will say that the whole podcast quote that Baker Mayfield said when he was brought to Tampa Bay, they wanted him to bring fun back to the organization, that a lot of players felt like it was just too much stress and stressful. And Tom Brady, who had the game on Sunday against the Eagles and Bucks, said, "I'm sorry, but for me, not winning Super Bowls is stressful." Okay, Tom, thanks for your 2 cents. But there was a little bit of friction there. You could tell between the comments made and his persona when he was in Tampa Bay. So that's what that was. But all right, Coach. Anything to mention about the call sheet coming up?
Well, I floated this idea last week about bringing some Eagles fans
Yeah,
on. The
I was
Eagles had won
disappointed.
last week. Well, let me tell you, man, that I'm ready now. All right, Angry Nate. I'm teeing up Angry Nate. That's all. That's all we're going by this week. But my buddy Nate, who will be referred to as Angry Nate, who's an astute football observer, man, and he knows the game. But man, he was texting me during the Eagles game yesterday. I'll just put it this way: the texts were coming in one after another, and they were in all caps, all caps. So that's all you need to know about the nature of those text messages.
I look forward to hearing that for sure. Make sure you check out Coach's work on social media. You can check him out on YouTube. We'll be getting more of that as his high school season winds down. You can check me out on social media and our Steel Curtain Network Steelers page. But Coach, as always, thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it. We'll talk next week.